They always said the universe was cold, but no one told Daniel Hayes it could feel this personal. The wind cut across the frozen relay outpost at 30 below, slicing through layers of insulation as warning lights blinked weak red against the endless white. And he kept moving because broken systems didn't fix themselves and nobody else was coming this far out. The air tasted like metal and static, every breath sharp, every step crunching over ice that hadn't seen another footprint in months. And that was when he saw it. A faint glow beneath the snow, not reflection, not machinery, something alive. He stopped, heart thudding louder than the storm, crouched down, brushed away frost with numb fingers until the shape revealed itself. A hand, slender, not human, skin shimmering blue like light trapped under glass, and it twitched. "No way," he muttered, breath fogging the air as instinct screamed to walk away. "Report it. Let protocol decide." But protocol had never looked back at him with fingers curling weakly against the cold. He dug anyway, faster now, ignoring the sting in his hands as ice gave way to fabric, then form. Then her, a woman, taller than him, even half-buried, skin glowing faint silver blue beneath the storm, hair like pale threads frozen against her face. And when her eyes snapped open, they weren't afraid, they were furious. "Unworthy human," she rasped, voice cracking through a translator struggling to keep up. "Remove your hands." But he didn't stop, couldn't stop, because her pulse flickered weak under his touch, and that was enough. "Yeah, not happening," Daniel said through chattering teeth, shrugging off his thermal jacket, the only thing keeping his core temp stable, and wrapping it around her shoulders as the wind howled louder, colder, like it knew he'd made the wrong call. She stiffened at the contact, eyes narrowing, something proud and ancient burning through the exhaustion. "I do not require," she started, but her voice failed her as the tremor hit, subtle but undeniable, and for a moment the distance between them cracked. Daniel exhaled slowly, steady, like fixing a machine, like solving a problem piece by piece. "You're freezing," he said simply, adjusting the jacket around her, ignoring how the cold immediately bit deeper into his own skin. "And out here, that's the only rule that matters." She stared at him like he'd spoken a language she'd never heard before, something beyond translation, beyond hierarchy, beyond whatever system had taught her what he was supposed to be. The storm shifted, light bending across the horizon, and somewhere far above, something moved, fast, deliberate, searching. Daniel didn't see it yet, didn't hear the distant hum cutting through the wind, but she did, and for the first time since he'd found her, fear flickered behind those luminous eyes. "You don't understand," she whispered, gaze lifting to the sky, and Daniel followed it, squinting through the white blur as a shadow passed overhead. Too large to be natural, too controlled to be random, and his gut tightened. He looked back at her, at the impossible glow of her skin, the quiet strength barely holding together beneath the surface, and then back at the sky again, and something clicked into place. Not a plan, not yet, just a feeling. "Yeah," he said softly, voice lost in the storm. "I think I'm about to." The hum came first, low and steady, cutting through the wind like a blade through glass, and Daniel felt it in his chest before he truly heard it, a vibration that did not belong to this frozen world. The woman in his arms stiffened, her glowing skin dimming just slightly as she looked skyward with something sharper than fear, something like recognition. Daniel followed her gaze and saw it clearly now. A dark silhouette slicing through the clouds with impossible precision, its edges too clean, too deliberate, nothing like the drifting debris storms he was used to. "That yours?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he adjusted his grip on her. Her weight light, but unfamiliar, her presence radiating a heat that felt almost alive against his freezing skin. "No," she said quietly, and that single word carried more weight than any explanation. The hum deepened, closer now, and Daniel's instincts kicked in not as a soldier, but as a man who had survived long enough to know when something bigger than him was about to arrive. "Okay," he muttered, scanning the horizon, his mind racing through the layout of the outpost 2 miles south. Broken shielding, partial power, but walls at least, something between them and whatever that ship was. "We need to move," he said, shifting her slightly, expecting resistance, expecting another sharp command to let her go, but she did not fight him this time. instead. Her fingers tightened weakly against his sleeve, a silent acknowledgement that even she understood the equation had changed. The wind howled louder as if urging them on, snow whipping sideways as Daniel took his first step, then another, boots crunching against ice that threatened to give way beneath him. Each breath burned, each step heavier than the last, and without his jacket the cold crept in fast, numbing his fingers, biting at his core. But he kept moving because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant realizing how impossible this was. "You are making an error," she said after a moment, her voice steadier now, but still laced with that distant authority. "You should leave me. Preserve your own survival." Daniel let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if it had any warmth in it. "Yeah, that sounds like the smart move," he said, adjusting her again as her head rested briefly against his shoulder. "Good thing I am not known for those." She went quiet after that. And in the silence he felt her watching him, not with judgment this time, but with something else, something searching. Above them the ship shifted, slowing, scanning, its presence pressing down on the landscape like gravity itself had changed. Daniel spotted the faint outline of the relay station ahead, half buried in snowdrifts. Antenna bent but structure intact, and he pushed harder, ignoring the way his legs protested, the way his vision blurred at the edges. "Almost there," he murmured, though he was not sure if he was reassuring her or himself. As they reached the outer wall, the metal groaned under the wind, frost creeping along its seams, and Daniel slapped his access panel with numb fingers until the door hissed open just enough to let them slip inside. The sudden stillness hit like a shock, the wind cut off, replaced by the low dying hum of emergency systems, and for a moment neither of them moved. Daniel leaned back against the cold metal wall, breath ragged, heart pounding, while she slowly lifted her gaze to study the dim interior, her eyes adjusting to the flickering lights. "This is where you live?" she asked, something unreadable in her tone. Daniel nodded, forcing himself upright as he guided her toward a makeshift cot. "Yeah, it is not a palace," he said, managing a faint smile, "but it keeps the wind out." She looked at him then, really looked, taking in the frost forming along his sleeves, the way his hands trembled, the absence of the jacket now wrapped around her shoulders, and for the first time since he had found her, her expression softened, just slightly. Outside, the hum grew louder, closer, and the walls seemed to vibrate in response, and Daniel realized whatever was coming had already found them. The walls trembled with a low, controlled resonance that did not belong to failing machinery, and Daniel felt it through the soles of his boots as he moved toward the control panel, fingers stiff and clumsy as he forced life back into the dying system. Dim screens flickering awake with static and fractured data. Outside, the shadow passed again, slower now, deliberate, as if the sky itself was watching. "They are scanning," she said from the cot, her voice steadier, quieter, but carrying a certainty that made him pause. And when he looked back at her, the faint glow of her skin reflected in the cracked monitors, turning the room into something almost unreal. "For you?" he asked, though he already knew the answer, and she held his gaze for a moment before looking away, as if the truth itself carried weight. "For what I represent," she said, and Daniel let out a slow breath, rubbing his hands together, trying to force warmth back into them, trying not to think about what that meant. The console beeped weakly, a map fragment loading, and he traced the perimeter of the station with his eyes, calculating blind spots, old maintenance tunnels, anything that might buy time. "All right," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "Then we make it harder for them." She watched him again, that same quiet scrutiny, as he moved through the room, dragging a portable power unit closer, rerouting cables with practiced motions, his mind settling into the rhythm of problem solving. "The only thing that ever made sense. You are preparing to resist," she observed, and there was no mockery in her tone now, only curiosity. Daniel shrugged, not looking at her as he secured a connection, sparks briefly lighting the dim air. "I am preparing to stay alive," he said simply. The lights steadied slightly, enough to reveal more of her features, the subtle patterns beneath her skin, the way the glow pulsed faintly, in time with her breathing. And for a moment he forgot the ship above, forgot the cold, forgot everything except the fact that she did not belong here, and neither did he, not really. "Your kind does not calculate odds?" she asked, tilting her head slightly, and Daniel allowed himself a faint smile. "Oh, we do," he said, glancing back at her. "We just do not always let them decide." Something shifted in her expression at that. Something small but unmistakable, like a crack forming in something that had always been solid. Outside, the hum intensified, closer now, and the walls vibrated in response, dust falling in soft whispers from the ceiling. Daniel straightened, listening, every sense alert, and then the sound changed, not louder, but sharper, focused, like a question being asked. The panel beside the door flickered, then steadied, and a faint signal pinged through the system. Not one he recognized, not one meant for him. She heard it too, her posture tightening as she pushed herself slightly upright despite the strain, eyes fixed on the door as if she could see through it. "They know," she said softly, and Daniel felt the weight of that settle into his chest, heavy and certain. He moved toward the door anyway, stopping just short of it, his reflection faint in the frosted metal, a man in a place too small for what was about to happen. Behind him, her voice came again, quieter now, almost different. "You still have time to leave." Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, feeling the cold, the fear, the absurdity of it all, and then he shook his head, a small motion, almost unnoticeable. "No," he said, just as quietly, and when he opened his eyes again, the door sensor lit up, responding to something on the other side, something waiting, something patient, and Daniel realized this was no longer about survival, not in the way he understood it before. The sensor light shifted from dim amber to a steady white, and the air inside the station felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Daniel stood there for a moment, listening to the faint electrical hum of systems barely holding together and the deeper vibration coming from beyond the door, something controlled, patient, waiting for acknowledgement rather than forcing entry. "They will not break in," she said behind him, her voice calm in a way that did not match the situation. And when he glanced back, she was sitting more upright now, the glow beneath her skin steadier, her posture no longer that of someone barely holding on, but of someone remembering who she was. "That is reassuring," Daniel replied quietly, though his eyes stayed on the panel, watching the subtle changes in its interface. Unfamiliar symbols beginning to replace the standard relay diagnostics. "Because I do not think this door would argue." "Very well." She almost smiled at that. Just a flicker, gone as quickly as it came, but it changed something in the room. The panel emitted a soft tone, not an alarm, not a warning, something closer to a request, and a line of symbols pulsed steadily, repeating, precise and deliberate. Daniel frowned, leaning closer, his breath fogging faintly in the lingering cold. "You want to tell me what that says?" he asked, and for a moment she did not answer, her gaze fixed on the display, something complex moving behind her eyes. "It is a formal summons," she said finally, her voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge. "They are requesting confirmation of my presence." Daniel let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair, the gesture automatic, grounding, requesting. He repeated, and something about that word settled differently than he expected. "So we still have a choice." She looked at him then, really looked, as if measuring that word against everything she knew. "Choice is not how my people define this moment," she said, but there was no certainty in it anymore, only habit. Daniel straightened, glancing around the small station, the flickering lights, the patched walls, the cables he had rerouted just minutes ago, all of it fragile, temporary, human, and then back to her, to the steady glow that did not belong in a place like this. "Well, it is how I do," he said simply, and stepped toward the panel. Her eyes widened slightly, not in fear, but in something closer to surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked, and he hesitated just long enough to consider the answer. Not the safe one, not the logical one, but the honest one. "Buying us time," he said, and instead of responding to the signal, he began rerouting the interface, feeding it fragmented data, looping the station's failing diagnostics into the incoming channel, masking, delaying, confusing. The panel flickered in protest, system straining, but it held, the steady pulse outside faltering for just a fraction of a second before resuming. Sharper now, more focused, she watched him work, silent, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the cot, and when he finally stepped back, breath uneven. She spoke again, softer than before. You risk much for something you do not understand. Daniel exhaled slowly, meeting her gaze. Maybe, he said, but I understand enough. The hum outside shifted again, closer, more insistent, and the walls responded with a low, resonant tremor that ran through the floor and up into his bones. He turned toward the door once more, the sensor light now flickering between states, uncertain, and for the first time since this began, he felt it clearly, not just fear, but the weight of standing between two worlds that did not know what to do with each other. Behind him, her voice came again, quieter, almost thoughtful. In my world, a guardian is assigned, chosen by rank, by strength, by design, she said, and he could hear the shift in it. The change, subtle but real. You were not chosen. Daniel allowed himself a faint, tired smile, eyes still on the door. Yeah, he said softly. I noticed. The light steadied again, the signal outside sharpening into something more than a request, and in the silence that followed, he realized this was no longer about delaying the inevitable, but about deciding what it would mean when it finally arrived. The signal changed again, not louder but sharper, like a voice losing patience, and the panel in front of Daniel flickered under the strain of his interference, lines of alien script stuttering as his improvised loop forced the incoming transmission to chase its own echo. The air inside the station felt heavier now, warmer in a way that had nothing to do with temperature, and he realized it was her. The faint glow beneath her skin growing stronger, more defined, as if proximity to whatever waited outside was restoring something she had lost. You cannot hold them indefinitely, she said, her tone no longer questioning but certain, and when he glanced back, she was already standing, unsteady but upright, the jacket slipping slightly from her shoulders as she adjusted to her own balance. Daniel let out a quiet breath, flexing his numb fingers before returning them to the console. I am not trying to, he replied. I am just making sure they do not get everything they want right away. She studied him in silence, the kind that carried weight, the kind that reshaped things, and then she took a slow step forward, then another, each movement deliberate, reclaiming space that had once belonged to her. The hum outside deepened in response, as if recognizing the shift, as if something beyond the door could feel her presence more clearly now. Daniel noticed it too, the way the signal stabilized for a brief second before pressing again, stronger, more precise, and he knew his window was closing. If you answer them, he said, not turning this time. What happens? She stopped a few feet behind him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her, a stark contrast to the cold still clinging to his skin. They will take me, she said simply, and there was no fear in it, only fact, and they will question you. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing that, not asking how, not needing the details, because some things did not require explanation. And if you do not answer, he asked, fingers pausing briefly over the controls, what then? For a moment she did not respond, and in that silence he could almost hear the weight of her world pressing in, the expectations, the structures, the rules she had lived under. Then they will wait, she said finally, and waiting is not something they are accustomed to. Daniel allowed himself a faint smile at that, something small but real. Neither am I, he murmured. The panel emitted another tone, sharper this time, and a new line of symbols appeared, more complex, layered, demanding, and even without understanding the language he could feel the escalation. Behind him, she moved closer, her presence steady now, no longer fragile, no longer uncertain. And when she spoke again, her voice carried something new, not authority, not command, but choice. In my world, this moment would already be decided, she said, her gaze fixed on the panel beside him. I would answer, they would retrieve me, and you would become irrelevant. Daniel glanced at her then, really looked, at the way the light played across her features, at the quiet shift in her expression, and he shook his head slightly. Yeah, he said, that sounds about right. She held his gaze for a second longer, and then, slowly, she reached past him, her hand hovering near the panel, close enough that the interface reacted, symbols shifting, recognizing her presence. Daniel did not stop her, did not move. He just watched, waiting, because for the first time since he had pulled her from the ice, This was not his decision to make. The hum outside steadied, expectant, and the walls of the station seemed to listen. Her fingers hovered there for a heartbeat longer, the glow beneath her skin reflecting in the panel's surface, and then she lowered her hand without touching it. "Not yet," she said quietly, and Daniel felt something shift in the room, subtle but undeniable, like a line had been crossed without anyone speaking it aloud. Outside, the signal pulsed again, sharper now, more insistent, but it did not break through, not yet. And inside the small, failing station, a human who had never been chosen and a princess who had always been decided for stood in the silence they had created together, holding it just a little longer. The silence after her words did not feel empty. It felt chosen, like a space deliberately carved out of something much larger, and Daniel stood there with his hands still hovering near the console, listening as the signal outside shifted again, no longer a simple pulse but a layered pattern, complex, adaptive, responding to her decision in real time. The walls carried the vibration deeper now, not threatening, not yet, but present in a way that could not be ignored, and for the first time since he had pulled her from the ice, he felt the scale of what stood beyond that door, not just a ship, but a system, a structure that expected the universe to behave in predictable ways. "They are adjusting," she said quietly, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the metal barrier, as if she could see through it, as if distance did not apply the same way for her kind. Daniel nodded slowly, stepping back from the console, flexing his hands as feeling returned in uneven waves. "Yeah, that sounds about right," he said, his voice low, steady. "They are not used to being told to wait." She turned toward him then, the glow beneath her skin steady and calm, no longer flickering with weakness. And there was something different in her expression now, something less defined by certainty and more by observation. "And your kind is?" she asked, and there was no challenge in it, only curiosity. Daniel considered that for a moment, glancing around the small station, the patched walls, the mismatched equipment, the signs of things repaired rather than replaced, and he gave a small shrug. "We wait all the time," he said, "for systems to come back online, for storms to pass, for things to make sense." He paused, meeting her eyes. "We just do not always know what we are waiting for." She absorbed that in silence, and for a moment the hum outside seemed to recede, not in volume but in importance, as if the center of the moment had shifted inward. The panel behind him flickered again, a new sequence appearing, more direct now, less formal, and even without understanding the symbols, Daniel could feel the change, the narrowing of possibilities. "They are requesting direct interface," she said, her voice softer, almost thoughtful. "They want me to respond personally." Daniel exhaled slowly, turning back to the console, studying the unfamiliar script, the way it pulsed in controlled intervals, precise and unwavering. "Of course they do," he murmured, running a hand along the edge of the panel, feeling the faint warmth of overworked circuits, because that would make everything simple again. She stepped closer, close enough now that he could see the subtle patterns in her skin more clearly, like light moving beneath the surface, and when she spoke, it was not as a ruler or a survivor, but as something in between. "In my world, simplicity is valued," she said. "Complexity is inefficient." Daniel let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh if it had carried any humor. "Yeah, well," he said, glancing at the tangle of cables he had rerouted, the improvised fixes holding the station together. "We tend to make a mess of things." The hum outside shifted again, sharper now, more focused, and the panel emitted a tone that resonated through the room. Not loud but undeniable, a presence that demanded acknowledgement. She looked at it, then at him, and for a moment neither of them moved. "If I answer," she said slowly, "this ends." Daniel did not look away from the console, his reflection faint in the dim light. "Yeah," he said, "it probably does." Another pause, longer this time, heavier, and then she asked, almost quietly, "And if I do not?" Daniel finally turned to face her fully, the distance between them small now, defined not by space but by choice. "Then it begins," he said, and the words hung there, simple and impossible at the same time. Outside, the signal pulsed again, more insistent, but still controlled, still waiting. And inside the station, The air felt warmer, not from heat, but from something else entirely, something that had not been there before. She held his gaze, searching for something, measuring something, and then, slowly, she nodded, not to him, not to the panel, but to the moment itself, as if acknowledging a path she had not expected to see. Daniel turned back to the console, his fingers moving again, not to block, not to delay, but to reshape the connection, to redefine what response might mean. And as the system hummed under the strain of something new, something untested, he realized this was no longer about surviving what was outside, but about changing what it expected to find. The console responded differently this time, not resisting, not glitching, but adapting, as if it recognized the intent behind Daniel's touch, and the flickering alien script began to stabilize into a cleaner pattern, something less like a command and more like a channel waiting to be defined. The hum outside shifted in tandem, subtle but immediate, like a distant listener leaning closer. Daniel exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the interface as he rerouted the final sequence, bridging human circuitry with something far more advanced, something that should not have worked but did anyway, held together by instinct more than understanding. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice low, not with doubt, but with focus. And when he glanced at her, she was watching every movement, absorbing it, learning it in a way that felt almost unsettling. "I am giving them what they asked for," he said, fingers steady now despite the cold still clinging to his skin. "Just not the way they expect." The panel emitted a soft tone, different from before, and a thin line of light spread across its surface, forming a narrow interface field that pulsed gently. Waiting, the room grew quieter around it, the failing systems dimming as if yielding priority to something else, something more important. She stepped forward without hesitation this time, drawn to the panel, her presence alone causing the interface to react, the light shifting toward her, responding to her biology, her identity. Daniel stepped back, giving her space, though his eyes never left the display, watching for instability, for failure, for anything that might break the fragile connection he had created. "This is not a standard link," she said, her hand hovering just inches from the glowing surface, the light reflecting across her skin in soft waves. "They will not be able to control it." Daniel nodded once. "That is the idea," he replied quietly. Outside, the hum intensified, not louder, but more focused, like a question narrowing into a single point, and for a moment the entire station seemed to align with it. Every vibration, every flicker of light, every breath they took falling into the same rhythm. She hesitated then, just for a fraction of a second, and Daniel saw it, the weight of everything she had been taught pressing against the simplicity of what stood in front of her. "If I speak," she said, her voice softer now, almost uncertain, "they will listen differently." Daniel met her gaze, steady, unflinching. "Then make sure they hear something new," he said. The words lingered between them, simple, impossible, and then she turned back to the panel, her expression shifting into something he had not seen before. Not command, not defiance, but intention. Her fingers moved forward, slow, deliberate, until they touched the light. The reaction was immediate, the interface blooming outward in a soft, radiant pulse, lines of energy tracing across its surface, forming patterns that extended beyond the panel itself, projecting faint reflections across the walls, across Daniel's hands, across her face. The hum outside stilled, not gone, but waiting, listening. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if centering herself, and when she spoke, her voice did not sound the same. It carried further, resonated deeper, not louder but clearer, as if the air itself had shifted to carry it. Daniel could not understand the words, but he understood the tone, the shift from expectation to declaration, from role to choice. The panel responded with a cascade of light, the symbols rearranging in rapid, fluid sequences. And for a moment it felt like the entire station was translating something far beyond language. Outside, the presence shifted. Again, not withdrawing, not advancing, but changing, and Daniel felt it in his chest, a pressure easing, replaced by something unfamiliar, something almost like hesitation. She opened her eyes slowly, the glow beneath her skin steady, unwavering now, and for a second she did not move, did not speak, as if waiting for the universe itself to respond. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, dense with meaning, and Daniel realized that whatever had just happened, whatever she had said, it had not gone unnoticed. The panel dimmed slightly, the lights softening, and she withdrew her hand, her gaze lingering on the interface before shifting to him. "They heard me," she said quietly. Daniel nodded, though his eyes were still on the door, on the unseen presence beyond it. "Yeah," he replied, voice low. "I think they did more than that." Outside, the hum returned, but it was different now, less certain, less absolute. And for the first time since the ship had appeared in the sky, it did not feel like something inevitable. It felt like something that could change. The silence that followed her voice did not break. It stretched, wide and fragile, as if something vast beyond the station had paused to reconsider a path it had already decided upon. Daniel felt it before he saw it, the subtle shift in pressure, the way the hum outside lost its edge and became something softer, uncertain, like a question without an immediate answer. He stood still, listening, his breath slow, controlled, while the dim lights above flickered once and then steadied, as if even the failing systems were waiting to see what would happen next. She remained beside the panel, her hand lowered now, the glow beneath her skin no longer pulsing but constant, calm, and when she spoke again her voice was quieter, almost reflective. "They are conferring." Daniel let out a small breath, rubbing his hands together more out of habit than need. "That sounds like a good sign," he said, though he did not fully believe it. "Not yet." She turned her head slightly, her gaze shifting toward the sealed door, as if she could sense the movement beyond it, the invisible exchange happening in a place he could not reach. "It is not common," she added. "Decisions are usually immediate, absolute." Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing that, and something in his expression softened just a fraction. "Yeah," he murmured. "We are kind of good at complicating things." The panel behind them emitted a low, steady tone, no longer urgent, no longer demanding, just present, and new symbols began to form across its surface, slower this time, deliberate, as if whatever was on the other side was choosing its words carefully. She stepped closer again, not with urgency, but with focus, her eyes tracking the changes, translating in real time, and Daniel watched her instead of the panel, watched the way her posture shifted with each new line, the way certainty gave way to something more layered. "They are asking why," she said finally, and the word lingered in the air, simple and enormous at the same time. Daniel blinked once, caught off guard by that. "Why?" he repeated, a faint, incredulous smile touching his lips. "That is new," she nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the interface. "They want to understand your interference, your involvement." Daniel glanced at the panel then, at the alien script that meant nothing to him and everything to her, and he exhaled quietly. "Well," he said, "that is going to be a short explanation." She turned to him then, fully, her expression searching, not for weakness, not for error, but for meaning. "Then explain it," she said, and there was no command in it, only invitation. Daniel hesitated, just for a second, the weight of that request settling into him, because there was no protocol for this, no system to fix, no equation to solve, just a question that did not belong to machines or hierarchies. He looked at her, at the faint light that no longer seemed out of place, and then back at the panel, at the waiting symbols, and he stepped forward. "All right," he said quietly, placing his hand near the interface, not touching it yet, just close enough to feel the warmth of its energy. "Let us try something different." She watched him carefully as he adjusted the connection again, not to override, not to distort, but to open, to allow a second input, something unfiltered, something human. The panel responded with a soft expansion of light, the symbols shifting to accommodate the new channel, and for a moment the room felt larger, as if the walls had moved back to make space for what was about to happen. Daniel took a breath, steadying himself, and then he spoke, not in their language, not in anything formal, just in the simplest words he had. "Because she was there," he said, his voice low but clear, and though he knew they could not understand the words, he felt something in the connection carry the meaning anyway. The panel pulsed once, the symbols rearranging, reacting, and the hum outside shifted again, not retreating, not advancing, but listening in a way it had not before. Daniel glanced at her, unsure if what he had done made any sense beyond his own head. But her expression had changed again, softer now, something almost like recognition flickering in her eyes. "They are receiving it," she said quietly, and Daniel nodded once, turning back to the panel as the symbols continued to evolve, slower now, more careful, as if the universe itself was trying to understand something it had never needed to before. The panel did not respond immediately, and that delay felt heavier than any command, any threat, because it meant something on the other side was no longer certain of itself. Daniel kept his hand near the interface, not touching it, just present, as if that alone mattered, while the symbols shifted slowly, reorganizing in patterns that seemed less rigid, less absolute. The hum outside softened again, no longer pressing against the station but circling it, like a thought that could not quite settle. Beside him, she watched the translation unfold, her eyes moving with each change, and for the first time since he had found her, there was no distance in her expression, no hierarchy, only focus. "They are confused," she said quietly, and the word felt almost foreign in her voice, like something she had never needed to say before. Daniel exhaled softly, a faint smile touching his lips. "Yeah," he murmured. "That happens when you ask why instead of what." She turned slightly toward him, studying him again. But this time there was no trace of judgment, only curiosity that felt equal. The panel emitted a low tone, deeper now, resonant, and a new sequence appeared, slower than before, each symbol forming with deliberate care, as if chosen rather than assigned. She stepped closer, her shoulder nearly brushing his, the warmth of her presence steady and real, and as she read, her expression shifted again, something unexpected passing through it. "They are asking what you gain from this," she said, her voice softer than before, almost uncertain. Daniel blinked once, taken aback by the question, and he let out a quiet breath, glancing at the dim walls, the patched systems, the small, fragile space that had somehow become the center of something much larger. "Nothing," he said after a moment, the word simple, unguarded. The panel pulsed, the symbols reacting instantly, and the hum outside changed again, a subtle shift that felt like attention. Sharpening. She looked at him, really looked, searching his face for something that might contradict what he had just said, but there was nothing there except quiet certainty. "That is not a logical exchange," she said, though her voice lacked conviction now. Daniel shrugged slightly, his gaze returning to the interface. "Yeah," he replied. "I have been told that before." The panel responded again, faster this time, but not with urgency, with interest, and the symbols rearranged into something more complex, layered with meaning she seemed to struggle to translate immediately. She frowned slightly, not in frustration, but in concentration, her eyes narrowing as she processed the shift. "They are attempting to define your behavior," she said slowly. "They are searching for a category." Daniel let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh, though it carried no humor. "Good luck with that," he said under his breath. The hum outside steadied, no longer uncertain, but no longer dominant either, as if whatever controlled it had paused its forward motion entirely. The station felt different now, not smaller, but more connected, as if the thin walls no longer separated them from what waited beyond. She turned back to the panel, her voice quieter now, almost reflective. "In my world, every action has a purpose, a return, a defined outcome," she said. And there was something fragile in the way she said it, something that no longer felt absolute. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes still on the shifting light. "In mine," he said, "sometimes you just do something because it is the right thing to do." The words hung there, simple, unremarkable, but the panel reacted as if they carried weight, the symbols pausing mid-formation before continuing, slower, more deliberate. Outside, the hum softened further, not fading, but listening in a way that felt almost careful. She looked at him again, and this time there was no distance at all, only something new, something forming in the space between them that did not belong to her world or his, but to this moment. "They do not understand you," she said quietly. Daniel nodded once, his voice low, steady. "Yeah," he replied. "But they are trying." The panel pulsed one more time, brighter than before, and the symbols shifted into a final sequence, one that made her still completely as she read it. The silence that followed was not uncertain. It was different, shaped by something neither of them had expected, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that had nothing to do with authority. "They are asking to see you," she said. The words settled into the room with a weight that felt heavier than any command that had come before, and Daniel did not move at first, not because he did not understand, but because he understood too well. "They want to see me," he repeated quietly, as if saying it out loud might make it sound less improbable, less real. But the panel did not change. The symbols held steady, waiting for an answer that was no longer just hers. Beside him, she did not look surprised, not exactly, but there was something in her expression that had not been there before, something like recognition meeting something like uncertainty. "It is not a request they make lightly," she said, her voice calm but lower now, more personal, as if the distance between her world and his had narrowed in ways she could not fully explain. Daniel let out a slow breath, his eyes drifting toward the sealed door, toward the presence beyond it that had gone from overwhelming to attentive, and that change unsettled him more than anything else. "What happens if I say no?" he asked, not looking at her, not looking at the panel, just standing there with the quiet weight of the question settling into him. She considered that for a moment, her gaze shifting between him and the interface, measuring possibilities that had never existed before. "They will wait," she said finally, echoing her earlier words. But this time there was a difference, a subtle shift in tone that suggested waiting was no longer as simple as it once had been. Daniel nodded once, absorbing that, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the console as if grounding himself in something familiar. "And if I say yes?" he asked. She stepped closer, not out of urgency, but out of something more deliberate, something that felt like trust forming in real time. "Then you will stand before them," she said, her voice steady. "Not as a subject, not as a threat, but as something they do not yet understand." Daniel allowed a faint, almost tired smile to touch his lips. "That seems to be a theme today," he murmured. The panel pulsed softly, as if acknowledging the exchange, and the hum outside shifted again, not pressing, not demanding, but holding, like a breath that had not yet been released. She watched him carefully now, her earlier certainty replaced by something far more complex, something that mirrored the question itself. "In my world," she said slowly, "no one would accept such a summons without preparation, without assurance of outcome." Daniel glanced at her then, really looked at her, at the glow that no longer felt foreign, at the presence that had shifted from something distant to something near. "Yeah," he said quietly. "In mine, sometimes you just step outside and see what happens." The words hung there, simple, almost casual, but they carried weight, and the panel responded with a subtle shift, the symbols rearranging into a new configuration, one that felt less like a command and more like an open door. Outside, the hum softened further, the pressure easing, as if whatever waited beyond had accepted the possibility of an answer without forcing it. Daniel turned fully toward the door now, his reflection faint in the frosted surface, and for a moment he just stood there, feeling the cold still lingering in his bones, the warmth of the room behind him, the presence beside him, and the vast unknown waiting on the other side. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly, and there was no command in it, no expectation, only truth. Daniel nodded once, his gaze steady on the door. "I know," he replied. A pause, brief but complete, and then he added, softer, "But I think I want to." The panel pulsed again, brighter this time, and the door sensor responded, its light shifting slowly as if waking from a long sleep, and Daniel felt the moment settle into place, not as something inevitable, but as something chosen. He reached out, his hand hovering near the control, and for the first time since the storm, since the ice, since the glow beneath the snow, he realized this was no longer about saving someone or surviving something. It was about stepping into a space where neither of them fully belonged and deciding what that meant. Behind him, she did not speak, did not move, but he could feel her presence, steady, real, no longer separate from the moment unfolding. The door remained closed, the light steady, waiting, and Daniel understood that whatever came next would not be defined by strength or power or design, but by something far simpler, something far more difficult to explain. He took a slow breath, his fingers finally brushing the control, and the station seemed to hold itself still as the choice began to take shape. The door did not open all at once. It released in a slow, measured exhale, a thin seam of pale light slipping through first before the seal fully disengaged, and the cold outside did not rush in like before. It flowed, controlled, almost guided, carrying with it a stillness that felt nothing like the storm that had buried her in the ice. Daniel stood in that threshold for a moment, the faint glow from beyond outlining his silhouette against the dim interior, and he realized the wind had stopped. Entirely, not calmed, not faded, but stopped, as if the world itself had paused to watch. He stepped forward. The ground beyond the station felt different under his boots, smoother, untouched, the snow no longer shifting or biting but settled, precise, and above him the sky was no longer chaotic. It was clear, wide, and dominated by the presence that had once been distant, now hovering in silent control, its surface reflecting light in ways that made it feel less like a machine and more like something observing. He did not look up immediately. He did not rush. He simply walked a few steps out into the open and stopped, hands at his sides, breath visible in the cold air that no longer seemed as hostile. Behind him, he could feel her presence at the doorway, not following, not yet, but there, steady, watching. The hum that had filled the air before was gone, replaced by something quieter, a low resonance that seemed to exist just beneath hearing, like a conversation happening at the edge of perception. Daniel lifted his gaze then, slowly, and the surface of the craft shifted in response, not dramatically, not aggressively, but with intention, a section of it opening not with force, but with invitation, revealing a space within that glowed with the same soft, controlled light as the panel inside. He felt it then, not pressure, not threat, but attention, focused entirely on him. And for the first time since this began, he understood what it meant to be seen by something that did not categorize, did not dismiss, but simply observed. He swallowed once, the motion small but grounding, and spoke without thinking, without preparing, because there was nothing to prepare for. "I am right here," he said, his voice carrying into the open space, simple, unguarded. The light within the opening shifted, responding, and the resonance deepened slightly, not louder, but closer, as if whatever listened had moved nearer to him. Behind him, he heard her step forward at last, her presence joining his, the faint glow of her skin contrasting against the vastness above. And when she stopped beside him, there was no distance left between their worlds, only this shared moment. She did not speak, not yet, and Daniel did not look at her. He kept his eyes forward, on the opening, on the unknown that had asked to see him. The air felt warmer now, subtly, impossibly, and the light expanded outward just enough to reach the ground in front of them, forming a path that did not demand, did not command, but offered. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound steady, and for a brief second he thought about the station behind him, the broken systems, the small life he had been living before this moment, and how none of it had prepared him for standing here. He took a step forward. The light did not change, did not react in any visible way, but he felt it, a shift, a recognition, and he realized this was not a test of strength or courage. It was something far simpler and far more difficult, the act of continuing. He paused at the edge of the illuminated path, just long enough to feel the weight of the choice settle completely, and then he stepped into it. Behind him, she followed. The light did not feel like light as they stepped into it. It felt like presence, like something aware brushing against his skin without touching it, and Daniel slowed without meaning to, not from fear, but from the weight of being noticed in a way he had never experienced before. The ground beneath his boots transitioned seamlessly, snow giving way to a smooth surface that reflected no clear image, only a soft distortion of movement, as if it preferred suggestion over certainty. Beside him, she moved with quiet control, her earlier hesitation gone, her posture no longer shaped by injury or expectation, but by something deeper, something reclaimed. The opening behind them sealed without sound, not trapping them, but completing a space that felt separate from the world outside, and the silence inside was absolute, not empty, but full, layered with something that did not translate into sound. Daniel took another step forward, his breath steady, his senses searching for something familiar, a console, a structure, anything that resembled a system he could understand. But there was none, only curved surfaces, soft light, and a sense of orientation that seemed to shift depending on where he looked. "This is not a vessel," she said quietly, her voice carrying differently here, clearer, as if the space itself supported it. "It is the field of thought made physical." Daniel let out a slow breath, absorbing that in the only way he could, by not trying to fully understand it. "Yeah," he murmured, "that tracks with everything else today." The light ahead of them gathered slightly, forming a focal point, not a shape, not a figure, but a concentration, and Daniel felt the attention again, stronger now, not overwhelming, but direct. He stopped, not because he was told to, but because it felt like the right place to stand. Beside him, she did the same, her presence steady, her gaze fixed forward, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The air, if it could be called that, shifted, and the connection they had established through the panel seemed to expand. No longer limited to symbols or translation, but something broader, something that carried intent more than language. Daniel felt it then, not as words, but as understanding pressing gently against his thoughts, a question forming without sound. Why? It was the same question, but deeper now, no longer about action, but about meaning. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, not to block it, but to focus, to find something honest in the middle of something incomprehensible. And when he opened them again, he did not look for the source. He simply answered. "Because she mattered," he said, his voice quiet but steady, and the space responded, not with movement, but with a subtle shift in pressure, like a ripple passing through something unseen. Beside him, she inhaled softly, the sound small but noticeable in the stillness, and he knew without looking that his answer had reached her as clearly as it had reached. Whatever listened, the presence did not withdraw, did not advance, it remained, processing, and then the sensation changed, not a question this time, but something else, something that felt like evaluation, not of strength, not of capability, but of intent. Daniel stood still, letting it pass through him, not resisting, not trying to shape it, just existing within it. She stepped slightly closer then, not out of fear, but out of alignment, her shoulder almost touching his, and when she spoke, her voice carried something new, something that did not belong entirely to her old world. "In my empire," she said softly, "value is assigned, measured, proven." She paused, her gaze steady. "But this cannot be measured." Daniel let out a quiet breath, a faint smile forming without humor. "Yeah," he said, "that is kind of the point." The presence shifted again, and this time it felt different, not confused, not uncertain, but changed, as if something within it had adjusted to include what it had not considered before. The light around them softened further, expanding outward in a way that felt less like observation and more like acknowledgement. And for the first time since they had stepped inside, Daniel did not feel like he was being examined. He felt like he was being understood, even if only partially. He glanced at her then, just for a second, and saw the same realization reflected back at him, not as certainty, but as possibility, and in that shared look, something settled between them that no system, no empire, no structure could define. The silence that followed was not empty. It was complete, and Daniel realized that whatever had brought them here, whatever had asked to see him, had not been searching for an answer it already knew. It had been searching for something it had never encountered before, and now, for the first time, it had. The presence did not speak again, not in the way Daniel expected, because there were no words left that could contain what had already been understood, and the light around them shifted once more, not brighter, not dimmer, but softer, like something vast choosing not to overwhelm something smaller. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling the tension leave his shoulders in a way that surprised him, as if he had been holding it long before this moment, long before the storm, long before he ever saw her. Beneath the ice, beside him, she stood still, her glow steady, but her posture no longer carried the weight of expectation, no longer held the rigid lines of command or duty, and when she looked at him this time, There was no distance left at all. The space around them responded subtly, the curved surfaces shifting almost imperceptibly, opening outward, not to contain them, but to release them. And Daniel understood without being told that the moment was ending, not because it had failed, but because it had reached something complete. He glanced forward once more, toward the center of the light, and though he could not see a form, he felt the acknowledgement clearly, not approval, not judgment, but recognition, something that did not need translation. A thought pressed gently at the edge of his awareness, not as a command, but as a reflection, something simple and vast at the same time, and though it had no words, he understood it anyway. This is new. Daniel let out a quiet breath that almost became a laugh, though it carried no humor, only a strange kind of relief, and he nodded slightly, as if answering something that could not be heard. The light receded then, not vanishing, but drawing back, giving space again, and the smooth surface beneath their feet shifted once more, guiding them without force toward the opening that had brought them inside. She moved first this time, not out of obligation, but with quiet intention, and Daniel followed, their steps slow, unhurried, as if neither of them wanted to rush what had just happened. The opening widened ahead of them, revealing the frozen landscape once more, but it did not feel the same, the cold no longer biting in the same way, the sky no longer vast and indifferent, but something that had been seen. They stepped out together. The moment their boots touched the snow again, the world resumed, not violently, not suddenly, but with a gentle return, the wind whispering instead of howling, the air moving as if it remembered how. Behind them, the craft shifted silently, its surface closing without seam or sound, and when Daniel turned to look, it was already lifting, not with force, but with ease, rising into the sky like something that belonged there more than anything else. He watched it for a moment, the reflection of its light fading against the horizon, and then it was gone, leaving only the quiet expanse of white and the faint imprint of something that had passed through. He stood there, hands at his sides, breath steady, and for the first time since this began, there was nothing pressing on him, nothing waiting, nothing demanding, just stillness. Beside him, she remained, not stepping away, not returning to whatever path had once been defined for her, but simply standing there, looking out at the same empty horizon, her glow soft against the cold light of the world. Daniel glanced at her, not expecting anything, not needing an answer, and she met his gaze with something that did not belong to rank or duty or expectation, something quieter, something chosen. Neither of them spoke. The wind moved gently across the snow, carrying no urgency, no command, just the quiet reminder that the world was still there, still turning, still waiting for whatever came next. Daniel shifted slightly, the movement small, grounding, and then he looked back out at the horizon again, the place where the light had disappeared, and he understood something in that moment that he had not been able to name before. He had not stepped forward because he was a guardian, or a hero, or anything larger than himself. He had stepped forward because someone had been there, because something had mattered, and that had been enough. The silence held, not empty, not waiting, but complete. He was not born to conquer the stars. He was born to remind them what hearts are for.